Euromonitor, we have Mr. Matthew Barry to present the evolving nature of global coffee demand. We will highlight the key growth markets around the world, analyze the performance of various coffee formats, and discuss how changing social habits and technologies are influencing coffee's consumption, and explore trends in the functional coffee space. Please join me in welcoming Insight Manager for Euromonitor, Mr. Matthew Barry.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Matt. I'm an Insight Manager at Euromonitor. We're talking today about demand. Where and how is the world drinking more coffee? Those who don't know Euromonitor, we are providers of market intelligence operating in 100 countries worldwide, headquartered in London, researching a wide variety of consumer good industries, including coffee, but also many other things. So a couple sections. First is looking at overall demand. What categories are growing? Where are they growing? Then we're going to look at consumer trends. What's driving that? What does the consumers today want out of their coffee, and what are they going to want tomorrow? Then conclusions, and if there's any time there's questions, I expect there will not be time, so please put your questions in the app or come find me later. So let's get into it. All right, so this is looking at total brewed volume of coffee consumed worldwide over a span of a decade. Now you'll notice here, as you've heard earlier, we are not at the pre-pandemic norm. There was problems during the pandemic, of course, lost occasions outside the home, a recovery in 2021, but we never got back to those old levels. Before the pandemic, we averaged 2 to 3% a year, and now notice we're well below that. And that is because of prices. High prices are affecting the consumer, which will be a constant trend of today's presentation, and that's keeping consumption growth more moderate than it would otherwise be. Now we're looking at the world here. Pink countries are seeing declining consumption, blue are seeing increases. So notice most of the world is drinking more coffee, some exceptions. Biggest being Germany. Also we see Finland, Greece, Italy, mature European markets drinking a lot of coffee right now and with tough demographic outlooks. Most of the world though, it's a good story. Slow but steady growth in North America, most of Europe, East Asia, Australasia, then faster growth into South America, much of Africa, and our very fastest growth in the Middle East and above all India. So the key here is that we're talking about consumption growth, we're talking about developing countries. We're talking about spending growth, talking about both developed and developing countries. If we look at future consumption growth in the next 5 years, 86% comes from developing countries. Now notice every region's growing, there's no region shrinking, but most of that's going to be the Middle East, Latin America, and Asia. Very little out of Europe, very little out of North America. Country by country, now we're looking in spending terms. Brazil is by far our most important growth market. Growth about $2 billion expected in coffee just at retail the next 5 years, followed by the United States and India. Now notice that list is mostly developing countries. France is on there, Canada's on there, but by and large we're talking about key developing markets driving much of growth in global coffee. Now looking segment by segment. Now we divide the segments, coffee into 5 major segments, standard ground, instant, ready to drink, beans, and pods. Now notice that our growth is being driven by our 2 most important formats, standard ground and instant, the biggest right now and the biggest source of growth. Then we have ready to drink, which is not doing that well, and that's because of problems in Japan, which I'll talk about. Then we have fresh beans, by far our best performing category, the smallest of the 5 right now, but the one gaining the fastest, very strong growth, particularly out of Europe in that category. Then pods, our slowest growing category. As beans have grown in European markets, pods have declined. And we see the pod category once was our most dynamic, and now it no longer is. Still growing, but not like it used to. This is showing region by region what's growing. A lot going on here. Don't try to memorize it all. 2 things to note. One is that no format does well everywhere. Every format has some regions it's doing well in, and some it's doing poorly in. Second key thing to note is there's 2 real growth patterns. One is developing regions. In those areas, it's driven by standard ground and instant, a little bit of growth in pods, a little bit from RTD, but mostly those 2 big formats. Europe, North America, different story. Standard ground and instant are not doing well. They're either stable or declining. Growth split driven by value-added formats. It's ready to drink in North America. It's beans in Western Europe, and a little bit from pods in both. So let's look at those one by one. What's going on in our key 5 segments? Well, standard ground is the most important, biggest by volume, the biggest by spending, and it's pretty stable most places. If you notice, North America, Europe, Asia, basically stable. That growth's coming from 2 places, Middle East, Africa, and especially Latin America. And when I say Latin America, I mean above all Brazil. A lot of that's coming out of just Brazil. So the market overall globally doing quite well, but that growth's very restricted to just a couple countries. Instant, kind of similar story, doing well in most places, major exception of Europe, where it's in decline. Interestingly here, North America is actually doing okay. Not historically a big segment North America, but one that is recovering, growing quite quickly, and much faster than the historic norm. Most growth, though, is Middle East, Latin America, Asia. It's our developing markets again. Ready to drink. Now, ready to drink is an interesting category because in 2010, this was all in Japan, that orange block. Basically, everything we consumed in this category was in Japan. And then we saw other regions joining. South Korea, our number 2 markets, starts to grow more importance, though even there we're seeing stagnation. But the real growth is everywhere else. The rest of Asia, especially Southeast Asia, the United States, Europe, a little bit Latin America, a little bit the Middle East. So it's a segment really doing 2 things. In its historical market of Japan, it's a segment not doing well. And because Japan is so important, that drags down global rates. If we're looking outside Japan, a category doing tremendously well. A lot of potential there, a lot of excitement, a lot of spending, especially in my homeland of the United States. Then we have beans. We talked a little bit about earlier. Giannis talked about this yesterday. Now, the beans are the fastest growing segment globally, and that growth is really coming from, above all, a couple places, and Germany. A lot of movement in Germany from pods as the preferred at-home value-added formats into beans. France, similar trends, although pods are still growing in France as well. And the rest of the markets here are kind of a grab bag. We have Ethiopia, Poland, Brazil. It's a lot of interest in a lot of different places, but that key global growth is coming out of Europe, and above all from Germany. Now, pods. Now, when I first started doing this, pods were every year the most exciting category, always growing the fastest. And that was true until about the pandemic. And we see the pandemic rates still very impressive, double-digit growth globally, and it never really recovers. As people move back outside the home, the pod market never got back to what it used to be. And that's particularly in Europe. Germany turned negative, Spain turned negative, parts of Scandinavia, and the US market reached kind of stagnation. Still growing in the United States, little bits, but not the double-digit growth rates we had in 2015, talking 0.5% annually. And that's dragged down the global market. There still is a lot of potential here in pods. We're seeing a lot of categories, a lot of countries still seeing growth, places like the UK, Brazil, but not as good as it once was. All right, so that's what's happening. Now let's talk about why it's happening. What is the consumer looking for today from their coffee? We're going to talk about 4 areas. The impact of prices, how technology is changing things, wellness culture, and sustainability. Now, the number one thing to know about consumers is that they think things cost too much. We ask this question in 20 places around the world, and we'll notice basically every adult worldwide thinks what they're paying for their basics of life is getting too expensive. Our major outliers are Japan and China, which are facing deflationary pressures. Other than that, basically everyone. Every region, every income level, they think things are getting too expensive. Which is interesting, though, because the question is not, are things too expensive? It is, are they becoming too expensive for you? And the inflation rates we just heard is falling. In most markets, outside of some outliers like Argentina or Russia, things are back to normal. The United States is nearing the Fed's target 2%, similar things being seen in much of the world. So we have a consumer base very frustrated by prices, and yet the inflation rate that's actually pretty normal. It's very important. What consumers are mad about is not inflation. What they're mad about is price levels. What they think things should cost is what they cost in 2019. And the fact they don't cost that anymore makes them very unhappy. And because things are not going to go back to those price levels again, they're going to be unhappy for some time. This is showing average household spending against the 2019 baseline. Purple is food and beverage, orange is overall. Notice in every region of the world, people are spending more money on food and beverage. That is not the historical norm. The historical norm is with each year, you spend less of your income proportionately on food and beverage. But since the last couple of years, things have changed. And coffee has very much been part of that. This is what the average person's paying against 2019 levels in our 6 most important retail markets. Notice in all of them, it's a lot higher. In most cases, much higher than the rate of inflation. So the average American, German, Brazilian is spending a lot more on coffee than they used to. And that has made them very unhappy. And this is not going to get better. This line is showing of overall consumer spending in the entire world, how much goes to food and beverage. Now notice in the 90s and the 2000s, it fell. And in 2007, it stops falling. At that point, global population growth, climate change, changing geopolitics mean prices have started going up across the board. Yes, in coffee, but many other things. Olive oil, sugar, cocoa, wheat, eggs, right? They've all gone up recently, and they're not going back down again because of long-term changes such as the climate. And that means our consumer base is mad about prices for the foreseeable future. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means it's harder to get them to spend more money on anything else. Looking at here is a question we ask every year. What do you look for in a food and beverage product? When you buy something at the grocery store, what do you want? And we see price remains equally important. Price has not moved. Everything else that's not price has fallen. Health benefits, taste, branding, sustainability, it doesn't matter. If it's not price, it's less important than it once was. The consumer is becoming much harder to sell value-added products to. Not impossible by any means. These are, not dramatic drops, but a steady erosion. Note also, number one thing they are looking for, it's not price, is health, because we're going to come back to that. This also means that we're seeing fewer product launches. This is from Euromonitor's new product innovation tracker. It tracks launches and products, in this case, in roasted ground, instant, and ready to drink in 40 global markets. And that purple line shows us the 6-month average of new coffee product launches. Notice, over the years, it goes down. People are launching fewer new products, in part because consumers are getting harder to sell to. They're less willing to take a risk than they once were. Also, interest rates are higher. It's harder to find money for investment in startup brands, and that's reflected not only in coffee, but in consumer goods overall. If I showed this chart for soft drinks, or alcoholic drinks, or beauty products, we'd see the same basic trend. So when people do have money, what do they want to spend it on? Well, ideally they want to save money. Number one is saving. Number two is visiting discount stores, which is basically another way of saying saving. But if they have more money, they want to spend more on something, we see two things stand out: education and health and wellness. When people have extra money, they want to invest in themselves and their loved ones for the future. Education and wellness spending are very similar in that. Education, of course, not super relevant to today's presentation, but wellness is. Now, okay, so wellness, okay, what does that mean for coffee? And the answer is it means a lot of things. We're looking here at changes in health claims in coffee products since 2019, and notice almost everything is up. Protein, cognitive health, beauty products, energy boosting, almost everything except two things. One is immune system health, which since the pandemic, of course, not as exciting as it once was, and weight loss. Weight loss is the only major functionality that is in decline, and that is because of a little medicine called Ozempic. All right, so we start out though with energy. Energy is always the most important talking about functional coffee. This is fascinating. We ask people, are you trying to avoid caffeine? Every year the answer goes up. We see now 45% of global adults say they're trying to drink less caffeine. We ask about this question under 40, it's over half now. So we have a consumer base globally that's saying, we want to drink less caffeine. But we don't see it in the sales figures. We don't see it in the coffee figures. We especially don't see it in the energy drink figures, which continue to be very fast growing every year, as you may have heard yesterday with the speaker from KDP. So what's going on? And the answer is we call the caffeine paradox. People are worried about the side effects of caffeine, they're not sleeping well, they're anxious, and they keep drinking more caffeine because they want to relax. They would love to get 8 hours of sleep a night. They would love to be calm and chill. The problem is they've got a lot to do. So they reach for their old reliable friend, caffeine, which is safe, it's reliable, and it's easily available. They keep drinking more and more, even if they tell our survey takers they want to drink less. So what's going on here is consumers are feeling guilty. They know they shouldn't drink so much caffeine, yet they keep doing it. So they want to do then is have caffeine in healthier ways, so they can feel better about what they're doing. So we're seeing a rise in so-called clean label, the idea of a product that gives you the caffeine and as little else as possible. It's especially prevalent in energy drinks, but we see it also in coffee. This is showing ready-to-drink coffee, changes the last couple of years in clean label claims, growth in basically everything. Artificial preservatives, low sugar, no artificial colors. People want their energy, they want it in a cleaner way than they used to. There's protein, a related question. We see if we ask people, are you trying to eat more protein? Across the board, everyone is, and it's rising every year. What's fascinating about this is most of the world's population lives in countries where they are getting enough protein. There are people who are protein deficient. They're generally the elderly, which we notice is the group that is the least likely to be trying to eat more protein. So we have here another strange situation. A population that is getting all the protein they need, yet wants ever more. And that's because protein is a sign of wellness. People eat protein not to fill a deficiency because they want to show they are a healthy person, and especially they're a person interested in physical fitness. And the number one reason why people eat more protein is because they want to be fit. So we have a culture that's prioritizing physical fitness, physical appearance, and protein is important to that. As worth noting, eating more protein than you need is not really harmful, except in some limited cases, so we can have this keep happening for some time. People eating more protein for really mental reasons more than physical ones. And I'll go back to the point earlier about weight loss, which is our most troubled category. This is showing weight loss supplements in the United States, a category that is virtually ceasing to exist because of the impact of the GLP-1 drugs, most famously Ozempic. The US market is the one where the most GLP-1 drugs are consumed, but make no mistake, these are coming across the world. They're getting cheaper, they're going off patent. For example, in China, Brazil, and India, these drugs are off patent in 2026. And we're going to see at some point in the next decade or two, tens of millions of people worldwide taking these drugs. Now, what does that mean for coffee? Well, people taking these drugs want fewer sweet, indulgent products. So they're going to be looking for something different for their coffee. They're going to want fewer milky, sugary beverages, more clean, low-calorie beverages. They'll still drink coffee, don't worry about that, but they'll drink it in a very different way. Now we turn to the out-of-home, which I haven't talked about much yet. Positive picture here. This is coffee shop spending across the world. And notice something very important here. It's dominated by two markets, China and the United States. Now, I haven't said much about China yet because China is so heavily focused on coffee shops specifically. Not a huge retail market, but very big outside the home. Now, we're talking about food service, though, as we heard a little bit earlier, it's a segment that never really recovered from the pandemic. That last chart was spending. The spending is up. The volumes are not because prices have gone up, consumers are buying less, and when they are buying coffee, in many cases, what they're buying is products with less and less actual coffee in them. Very elaborate, very customized drinks, full of lots of different things, but less actual coffee. So we see that orange recovery line, we don't actually get back to pre-pandemic levels until probably next year at a global level. This is a quote from the former CEO of Starbucks, talking about a shift from the out-of-home business to the at-home business. Now, note, he's the former CEO of Starbucks, in large part because of this problem. Starbucks has seen quarters of losses in their key markets of China and the United States, and that's because of long-term warning signs for the food service segment. Above all, that consumer pullback in spending because of perpetually high price levels. Also, is competition from new styles of coffee shops. We see tomorrow's coffee shop is much smaller, it's much simpler, it's much more digital, and it's not a place you hang out. This is from Brazil, although it has Japanese lettering on it for aesthetic reasons. Now notice this coffee shop has nowhere to sit. Many of our new chains are increasingly embracing this idea. Places like Blank Street, and also now many established chains. Most Starbucks now that are made in the United States don't have seating. My local Starbucks took away its chairs years ago. You now cannot sit down in that Starbucks anymore. That is a huge shift for the industry. In the 90s and 2000s, coffee shops were all about hanging out. And now they're about getting what you want, getting in and getting out as fast as possible, especially in China. This is Luckin, which is now the biggest chain in China and one of the biggest in the world, and one that is spreading globally. Luckin's going to expand now in Southeast Asia, moving into the United States, and their model is very much low-cost, digital ordering, customized drinks. In many locations, you actually cannot order in person. There is no cashier that will take your payment. It's got to be done digitally. And this model is spreading worldwide, especially in Asia and North America, which I think creates a challenge because we have here a coffee shop segment moving more digital at the same time that we have a society where people are more lonely. They want human connection. They recognize they spend too much of their life staring at screens. And how do we surmount this? We have, even among Gen Z, notice a strong interest in real-world experiences. They've spent much of their lives doing things digitally, and a lot of them are recognizing, maybe I want some things that are actually human. Maybe I want some things that are personal. And that's going to be a key challenge for coffee shops in the years ahead. How do you balance that need for the digital and the modern with that need for the human touch in a world growing more cold and isolating? I think what we're going to see is a split. One segment's going to go very hard that direction, that Luckin, that new Starbucks model, digital, customized, ordering on your phone, fast, efficient. I'd expect in the near future, done by robots. But another segment's going to say, no, we're not going to do that. We are a place you get a human touch. It'll be slower. It'll probably cost more, but you'll get an experience. We're not just a place to get coffee. We're a place to be and associate with other human beings. And I think we're going to see both in the years ahead. Where the challenge is going to be is don't get caught in the middle. If you do one, you can't really do the other. That brings me then to our final point, sustainability, which I think everyone's talked about today, so I've talked about as well. And the challenge here is the consumers. We saw earlier, consumers don't want to pay more for anything, and sustainability is part of that. That's not saying they don't care about sustainability. What it's saying is that they're very reluctant to spend more money on things of any nature. We saw earlier also, for example, they'll spend less money on things that taste good. That does not mean they don't want things that taste good. It just means that spending's getting much harder. This is especially true in Europe. Notice that big drop, which corresponds with the beginning of the war in Ukraine and the rise in energy prices and food associated with that. But the industry cannot wait. As we all know, sustainability is a today problem for the industry. We can look outside and see climate change taking place. If we look across the food and beverage industry, no one's really pulling back because they recognize this is a challenge that we cannot wait for. But that means, though, we have a consumer base saying we don't really want to pay more for anything, and industry saying we need to invest in the future, or else there will not be a coffee industry in the decades to come. So this is the key sustainability challenge, I think, facing coffee, is how do you balance the necessary investments at origin with a consumer base who's been very clear that they don't want to pay more except in very limited circumstances? Well, there's no easy answer, but I'll venture a couple. One is leverage wellness. We know in many cases the sustainable solution is also healthier. If you use less pesticides, that's also a healthier coffee as well as a more sustainable coffee. I have here why people drink plant-based milk. That's a category that's often held up as very sustainable, and it's one that's doing pretty well right now, even amid cost of living pressures. But you'll notice, why do people drink plant-based milk? It's not for the environment. The environment is number 7 in reasons. They drink plant-based milk because they think it's healthier for them, and that's why they'll spend more money. It is more sustainable, and that helps, but if you can combine those two, healthy and sustainable, that makes it much easier for consumers to spend more money because we know how much they prioritize wellness as a spending goal. We also need to talk about technology. Now, we asked a question here, would you eat eggs, cocoa, or chocolate from a bioreactor? We don't ask about coffee, but we can assume the answer is pretty similar. Now, notice the consumer base is not excited about this. It does vary based on country. In India, we're at 1/4. In France, it's about 1 in 20 people. We have a skepticism about new technology. The question is, how do we merge the technology with the cost? If we asked this question and said, but it will cost 30% less than regular coffee, I bet this number goes way, way up. So we have here a real question of how much is technology going to be able to drop costs, and will the consumer accept it? I think we're going to see in the long term is a split in the industry between consumers who will pay whatever cost, Parmesan Arabica, and another consumer base that will say, I'd like that ideally, but if the cost is better, I might drink the Robusta. I might drink a new strain, which might not be commercially developed yet. I might drink the lab cultivated one day. So we'll see that tension too. Between consumers we know values high quality specialty coffee, but also reluctant to spend in many cases. All right, so now we have some conclusions, and then if there's any time, I can do questions. Now, you want to remember 4 things. make it these four things. One, coffee consumption is growing across the world. And as it grows, every year, developing countries become more and more important in that overall mix. Two, the most important trend facing consumers is how they react to high prices, both within coffee and in overall food and beverage. Everything they do is really a downstream effect of those high prices in the coming years. Three, where they do have more money to spend, what they want to spend it on above all is wellness. They want healthier products. They want to invest in themselves in the long run. Four, sustainability is critical for the industry. For the consumer, though, there's a strong reluctance to spend more money unless they absolutely have to. And there'll be a key challenge balancing that budget-focused consumer with the necessary investments on the supply side of things in the years to come. Right? So that was the presentation. Again, I'm Matt Berry with Euromonitor. Here's my contact info if you want to reach out afterwards. But otherwise, I think I might have a little bit of time for questions. Thank you.